let's slightly pivot. Let's see, where could he go? Let's rate some coaching positions in the NFL and give our thoughts on whether or not they are on the hot seat. Is that job available? Should Jim Harbaugh think about going to any of these teams? This is our NFL coaching hot seats. So hot or not, we may call it, hot, just right, cold. We'll see what happens. All right. I'm going to tell you the coaches as we get to them. So first up, we have Denver Broncos, Vic Fangio.
So Fangio is interesting to me because they haven't had a winning season yet, and they had a chance to maybe make the playoffs. They kind of fell apart at the end of the season this year, but they're in a brutal division, right? The AFC West is brutal, and they haven't been great at quarterback, right? Yep. So, I don't want to blame it all on Fangio, but at the same time, you have 3 straight losing seasons. The NFL's a what have you done for me lately league, and for 3 years, Fangio has done a lot of losing. I think he's on the hot seat. I think the Broncos may be looking to move on.
All right, Vic Fangio in the hot seat. Yeah, I can see Teddy Bridgewater hasn't been as billed per se. Who is it? Drew Lock, their backup?
Yeah, from Missouri. Yep.
Drew Lock, not great. Defense has been lackluster at times. They've gotten beaten pretty bad a few times. I would agree. It seems like a pretty hot seat. What do you a little bit vaguely, do you think this is a desirable position if Fangio's to leave?
No, I think that's one of the reasons why Fangio took it, because what you want if you're a head coach, right, and you're looking for a right position, you want a place that already has either a really high draft pick so you can get a quarterback, or already has their quarterback and preferably does not have a dominant division.
So this has none of those things. Dominant division, no quarterback, no high draft pick.
Yeah, it's because if you go there and you're like, okay, well, we need a guy that can compete with Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and Pat Mahomes. Well, we don't have that guy right now, and we pick 15 overall. So unless they get like an Aaron Rodgers type or something like that, this is not a desirable place for anybody.
All right. Next up, Kyle Shanahan, San Francisco 49ers. Bit of turbulence this season. Jimmy G's consistently getting hurt. We're not so sure yet about Trey Lance. What do you feel? How's his seat feel? What's the temperature like there?
So this is warm, which is kind of weird to talk about because a few years ago, they went to a Super Bowl. They had a double-digit lead in Kansas City in the fourth quarter. They could have been Super Bowl champs without a whole lot going wrong. But the fact of the matter is, when Jimmy Garoppolo is not starting with Shanahan, they've been terrible. They've won like 27% of their games when Garoppolo isn't starting. That is really, really bad. That is terrible. That's like Detroit Lions, New York Giants level of futility. But that being said, right, they're sitting there right now with a chance, if they win this weekend, to get in the playoffs. If they lose and they miss the playoffs this year, I think Shanahan could potentially be warm and could find on his way out. I think the seat is warm. I don't think he's potentially going to get fired yet, but I think they're going to start to lose some patience there in the NFC West because, look, they had a decent run there, but right now you've got Arizona, which playoff team. You've got the Rams that are all in for a couple of years. Seahawks are kind of in the upheaval right now, but you still have a pretty tough division. It's going to be hard to, you got to have your right coach quarterback. And right now we don't know, is Garoppolo the guy? Is Trey Lance the guy? And is Shanahan the guy? Shanahan can't win without Garoppolo. There's a lot of questions. There's more questions than answers in San Francisco right now. And I think if a better coaching candidate, maybe a more senior veteran guy becomes available, I could see them moving off Shanahan.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest warm metrics that has happened is the drafting of Trey Lance. And, I mean, he's had a couple of flashes. He's been like meh. Like, not enough information yet, but you draft a guy that early like that, like...
And traded up to get him. They gave up a lot of picks.
Yeah, you expect a little bit more. So, and if you look at the 49ers, you don't even know if they're going to keep Trey Lance. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it seems like he could be gone at any minute if Jimmy G somehow gets magically healed and does a little bit better.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's so much volatility with the 49ers. You really don't know who they are or what they are in terms of personnel. I mean, they kind of run that Shanahan offense, which is a really good offense, it's a really smart offense. But like in terms of their identity as a team and who they're, who's pulling the trigger at quarterback, offense, defense, what's their identity? It's really kind of up in the air. John Lynch, we really don't know how good of a GM he is either. I think there's a lot more questions than answers in San Francisco right now, especially if they miss the playoffs.
All right, moving on to our next coach, going from sunny San Francisco to the wintry north of Minnesota, Mike Zimmer.
Yeah, so Mike Zimmer, I'm going to go ahead and put him on the hot seat. A few years ago with Case Keenum, I think in 2017, Case Keenum replaced Sam Bradford, and Zimmer led this team to the NFC Championship game. Remember the miracle in Minnesota that year. And a couple years later, he beat him and Kirk Cousins beat the New Orleans Saints again in the playoffs in overtime. Ever since then, especially the last 2 years, this team has fallen apart. I mean, they're already eliminated from the playoffs this year. They could finish with they're already going to finish with a losing record. They had a losing record last year. The trend is down with this team. And the thing is that I think with Zimmer is the team has talent, right? Jefferson is a stud young receiver. Kirk Cousins is solid, not great, but solid. They've got Thielen when healthy. They got Dalvin Cook. They got a couple of nice defensive players, Kendall Hunter at defensive end and Harrison Smith at safety, Anthony Barr. Like they've got players. I think we talked about Denver not being a desirable position, like for coaches. I think Minnesota is extremely desirable, right? You have a division where obviously the Packers are good, but Aaron Rodgers may be retiring. You have Detroit rebuilding, Chicago rebuilding. You already have at least some level of, I think Kirk Cousins is an average to above average, which again can give you a lot in the NFL. You have enough young pieces. I think this is a desirable spot for coaches. And I feel like Mike Zimmer's let the team down the last couple of years, especially on defense.
Yeah, that was the key for me, though. Big defensive guy in the last couple of years. Defense has been very lackluster. A lot of high-scoring games. Not your typical Zimmer-led defenses. And I think, like you said, he's underperformed in every aspect, but mainly, the most specifically, the aspect that he is supposed to be the best at. So, he's definitely in the hot seat for me as well. Moving on to my favorite, Kevin Stefanski, Cleveland Browns.
So I'm going to give this a cold, and here's why. Cleveland was so bad for so long. And last year in 2020, Kevin Stefanski, granted, he actually wasn't even on the sideline for this, the Browns won a playoff game. For the Browns, that's like winning a Super Bowl. So I think Stefanski is home free for at least another 2-3 years. And look, I think they're moving off Baker. Baker's proven himself to be a disaster, as we've talked about 50 million times. I think they move off Baker. They try and go a different route at quarterback next year. And I think Stefanski in the reload, I think they probably see some improvement. I think Stefanski's safe. I don't see any threat really to his job.
Yeah, it's like you said, reload, but it's more like they have all the bullets already. They just need a new gun.
Yeah.
But yeah, Stefanski has been pretty solid. If you take out Baker Mayfield, I think the team's performed pretty well overall. They made some good moves. They've drafted and free agent signed themselves quite the squad. Like we always talk about, they've got like Pro Bowlers, all pros at like every side of the ball all over. So like you said, he for the Browns, all the coaching turbulence, all the turmoil they've had internally in the front office, traditionally being that bad, there's no way they're moving off a guy that won them their first playoff game in forever last year. So we'll see what's going on. Like you said, I think they moved from Baker Mayfield and keep this train going and see what Stefanski is made of. All right, we have one of our favorites and an allegedly safe coach. We'll see what you have to say. Joe Judge, New York Giants. They said he's going to keep his job. What do you think?
I think his seat should be hot. I'll call it warm, just to kind of split the difference between the two. I think he should be fired. He went 6-10 last year, but like the theme of that year was, hey, first year implementing, the discipline, the system, the process. This year, Daniel Jones coming back. Hey, it's going to be a big year. We're going to make steps in the right direction. And they've fallen apart. They're 4-12. The Giants organization has been an absolute dumpster fire for the last 6-7 years. They got rid of Gettleman, but they said they're bringing back Joe Judge and Daniel Jones. I don't get that. I think the only thing that like saves Joe Judge is the fact that you can say Daniel Jones is a bust and he didn't draft Daniel Jones. But he's also bringing back Daniel Jones, which doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it. Like the Giants just don't make any sense to me right now with what they're doing. I think Joe Judge should be fired. They say he's not firing him. Honestly, I wonder whoever, once they bring in a GM, if this GM is able to sell the Mara family on maybe a different coach. I'm going to wait till that's why I have this as a warm. I wonder if the new GM comes in and looks at the roster, looks at the coaching staff and says, hey, we can make a little bit of a change here.
Yeah, I would say warm, leaning towards hot more. But the Giants have been very bad ever since he's got there. Daniel Jones really hasn't done anything outside of his rookie year where he was okay. I don't know why they would say that. Why even say, oh, your job's safe? Like, there's no point. Like, just keep it moving. And you don't have to commit to something like that. Let's say, okay, we're going to go into the off season. We're going to look at our options and we'll go from there. There's no reason after coming off of a terrible losing season to say that you're going to keep your quarterback who's performed awfully and your head coach who also hasn't done very well. So I don't understand that move by the Giants to say that. But
the
like
only thing I can think of, and not to cut you off, but the only thing I can think of is if the Mara, they're trying to play like three-dimensional chess here, the Mara family. And obviously the Giants have had injuries to Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, a lot of those guys. And they shut him down at the end of the year, like a couple, at least Daniel Jones is shut down for starting like 3 weeks ago now. I think the thing with, I wonder if the Mara family is like, look, if we told Joe Judge, like, hey, you're coaching for your job, if he like tries to force those injured players back or something like that, you know what I mean? Like they want to make Joe just think he thinks he's safe. So that way he doesn't, risk hurting long-term players by forcing them to play hurt in obviously a lost season. I don't think that's what's happening, but maybe the Mara family's got some kind of, clever game going on here.
That's right. You heard it here, folks. Joe Judge, loose cannon head coach who will take the team down with him. So, you got to save him from himself. All right. Next up on our list, one of our favorite coaches to talk about this season. There's been a lot of good stories about him. Matt Nagy. We said earlier in the show, Jim Harbaugh potentially linked to Chicago as well as Las Vegas. So does this mean Matt Nagy's seat's hot if he's linked to Chicago?
So this seat is red hot. In fact, there are stories already coming out that it's gone. I mean, there were stories as early as Thanksgiving that he was fired. I see no reason for him to keep his job. He's definitely gone. He had that his first season. He actually won Coach of the Year. They went 12-4, but ever since then, they had 8-8, 8-8, and now this disaster of a season. I think the thing with the Bears is there's two things. There's the trend, right? When the trend is going all the way down, he started 12-4, then 8-8, then now where it is now. I think when you have that kind of trend, it's hard for the owners and the GMs to keep you, right? It's one thing to like have a bad year and then jump back, but the fact that it just keeps getting worse is just it's time to make a change there in the Bears organization. And I think the other nail in the coffin for Nagy was the fact that he couldn't get it done with Trubisky. Mitch, he couldn't develop him. He's supposed to be a quarterback guru, couldn't create an offense and develop Mitch Trubisky. So obviously they draft Justin Fields, bring in Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton has won a lot of games in his NFL career. And Justin Fields was a, young talent who played a lot at Ohio State, was a star player, obviously. So even with those two guys at quarterback, Matt Nagy and really that offense really, really struggled. And I think when you look at those two things, he's an offensive guy that can't coach a good offense. He can't develop quarterbacks, and the trend being just straight down into the basement. I think Nagy's gone. There is a 0% chance he's with the Bears past week 18.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I thought he was going to be gone at Thanksgiving. Surprised he wasn't. Maybe he won one game. That's what saved his job. And he's royally screwed up Justin Fields so far this year. We've seen a couple good games. What this potential was, And we've seen a couple of Matt Nagy's terrible game plans that he's put in for Fields. So, nonetheless, I agree with you. It never wasn't going to be anything but a hot seat for Matt Nagy. We are coming to the end of the list. A couple more coaches to go through. What do we think about Sean Payton, New Orleans Saints? They got kind of a little quarterback controversy going on.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird deal with the Saints because they were obviously always at the top of the NFC for years with Drew Brees, and Brees being gone now, they kind of had to retool. They had Jameis Winston. He obviously got hurt. They had all kinds of issues at quarterback this season. They went with Trevor Siemian, then switched to Taysom Hill, had to start Ian Book for a game. I think this is obviously a cold. His job is not at risk, I think. But I think the scary thing if you're the Saints is what is the future? Right, because Jameis Winston had question marks anyway. He's obviously hurt. What's he like after this? Taysom Hill has not looked like a long-term guy at quarterback. Trevor Siemian certainly isn't. Ian Book, granted it was one game, was absolutely awful. And I think that's the thing with the Saints. Like they were so used to such stability at quarterback for decades with Drew Brees. And now that it's gone, I think it's a lot harder. And credit to that defense in New Orleans for keeping them to this point. They can still actually make the playoffs. But I think right now, Sean Payton, they got to find a quarterback. Otherwise, this team could get worse in the years to come.
Yeah, well, Sean Payton definitely cold feet. But if I was to pick a defining moment to lean him towards medium, like a warm seat, the Taysom Hill debacle, paying him that mega contract, and then him coming out and actually being terrible at quarterback the last couple games he's been in. He's been a liability for the team, and it's like, okay, he has a weird hybrid contract where you have decent money for a gadget player that can be ramped up into good money for a quarterback. But why? It's such a weird move to make when he's never even proved himself as a quarterback. He's been a pretty good gadget player, but whenever he has to take over the reins 100%, I have no confidence in him. So I think it's a questionable move by Payton, who I know loves Taysom Hill.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Just the fact that he's invested so much in Taysom Hill, which hasn't made any sense. Anytime Taysom Hill, basically any game where Taysom Hill doesn't have a lead and they can't just run quarterback power to milk the clock, he's a disaster. I agree with you there. That's going to be a problem for the Saints going forward.
But everything else he does pretty good. So, moving on to our next one, we have Matt Rhule, Carolina Panthers.
So this is the guy who came out of Baylor 2 years ago, was highly touted head coach, was given a lot of money, $50 million plus by a new Carolina Panthers owner, the hedge fund billionaire David Tepper. Last season, double-digit losses. But again, it's sort of like, hey, his whole selling point was like, hey, we're trying to build the process and the systems in place. They had Bridgewater at quarterback. They brought him in, played a lot of money. Didn't work out. So what do? They bring in Sam Darnold in this year. Well, guess what? That hasn't worked out. So what do? They go back to Cam Newton. That hasn't worked out. They try and go back to Darnold. Then they kind of alternate between the two. It's been just a disaster. Matt Rhule fires his offensive coordinator. It's been such a disaster. They're another 10-loss season last 2 years. You've got David Tepper, the owner, saying he's embarrassed with how the team is being executed on the field and all that stuff. I think this is a hot seat for Matt Rhule because he was paid a lot of money, was brought in to kind of turn the culture around. Remember, this was a Panthers team that not long ago was, making deep playoff runs.
Oh, yeah. Super Bowl run.
Yeah. They had obviously Cam Newton, Luke Kuechly, Greg Olsen. They had a really good team. But, they've kind of obviously with the injuries with Cam Newton and things like that, they kind of took a step back. But they haven't been able to retool. And I think Matt Rhule was supposed to come in and kind of lead that. And it's been just really bad. I mean, it's almost Joe Judge level of bad. And I think the big problem with the Panthers is the fact that Matt Rhule doesn't seem to know what he's doing with the quarterback position, which you have to at least be emphatic and decisive. He pays Bridgewater a lot of money. Didn't like him, got rid of him. Sam Darnold comes in, pays him money, doesn't like him, benches him, and then he gets hurt. Cam Newton, again, it's not 2015. Why are you bringing Cam Newton back in the fold? Cam Newton's bad. They go back to Darnold, who's bad. They do the subbing thing. It just doesn't work out. It just seems so volatile and just seems so disjointed. They just seem rudderless right now. The whole process and system that Rhule was supposed to implement isn't working at all. I think this is I would not be surprised at all, to be honest with you, if Tepper fires Rhule at the end of the season. Although I think he may give him one more year.
I don't know, man. Tepper's kind of a fiery owner. He makes a lot of what I would say like jerk decisions, like just like snap of the fingers. Makes real quick decisions, like with releasing Cam Newton. I'm not saying that was a bad move on his part at the time, but they parted ways with Cam Newton pretty quickly. They parted ways with Joe Brady, and I think that's one of the reasons they've been worse ever since Joe Brady left. So Joe Brady might not be the problem. Joe Brady might have been one of the reasons they were doing any semblance of anything.
Well, and that's why I wonder a little bit is if Matt Rhule in meeting with Tepper was like, hey, the problem is, after last year, the problem was Bridgewater. We need to get another quarterback. So they bring in Darnold and they stink. And then Rhule's like, hey, we need to get a different quarterback. Darnold's a bust. So they bring back Cam and it still doesn't work out. And then Rhule's like, hey, it's the offensive coordinator. He's calling the plays. So they get rid of him and it still doesn't work out. Like, I think the fact that they've had to make so many changes is probably frustrating the heck out of David Tepper. And he probably doesn't have any patience with this because you need to be stable, right? If like this, they've had like a 6-week run where they've changed quarterback in 3 times and they've obviously changed coordinators. It's just so volatile. It's all over the map. Who knows what the Panthers are doing? David Tepper is not going to stand for it. I honestly think, I would not be surprised at all if Rhule gets fired.
Me either. I could see it happen. Coming up on our last two, Washington football team, known for epic proportions of stadiums falling down, the bench debacle, infighting on the team. The leader of the bunch, Ron Rivera. What do we think his seat's feeling like after all of the news that's come out lately?
So Ron Rivera, he went 7-9 his first year, but they actually won the terrible NFC East. This year he's 6-10. So he either goes 7-10 or 6-11. So obviously a bad year. Back-to-back losing seasons. Not great. I'm going to give him a warm here. His one excuse is that they've had some, Heineke's their quarterback, but he's not great. They've had some injuries at quarterback and stuff. They haven't been very stable there. I think the thing is, Ron Rivera was brought in to bring in some discipline and some accountability to the organization. That really hasn't happened, right? The whole bench debacle, like Rivera has a say in that kind of stuff. Remember the fighting on the sideline between Jonathan Allen and Jerron Payne? Like that's part of the environment that Ron Rivera tries to cultivate. And he's just done a bad job of it. And I don't think he gets fired, but I think he's definitely potentially, if they have a slow start next year, they started 2-6 this year. If they start 2-6 next year, I could see Rivera getting fired midseason because this whole discipline culture and new environment he was supposed to bring into Washington just isn't there. It hasn't happened. So unless he starts turning around with wins in 2022, I could see him getting fired pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably warm. Team hasn't done great. It seemed a little bit unstable, which, like you said, he is supposed to bring the stability, the discipline to the team. One thing I'd like to point out, and this is like extremely off the wall, but seeing his hat on the screen has reminded me of this. What do you think the over-under is on them actually ever changing their name from anything but the Washington football team now?
So they've actually, I think recently, just before the filming of this episode, said they're going to try and release their name and logo February of this year.
I think they're going to dupe us and be like, here's our new logo. It's actually the same. We're just going to be called the Washington football team.
That would be, I would not be surprised. I think it's, I think I'm not, there's nothing that would surprise me with this Washington organization right now. I think the only reason they probably really want to keep Rivera there, to be honest, is with everything going on with the emails, the benches, the stadium railing collapsing, almost killing Jalen Hurts the other day. I think right now, Daniel Snyder, the owner, probably wants to keep any potential bad news or at least a lot of publicity down.
Oh, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. They want to keep their head down, keep the Washington name out of the radar.
Yeah.
So probably good move to release the name during the offseason where not too much else is going to come out. Keep it moving. Don't bring too much attention to yourself. But finally, we have gotten to the end of this list. our last coach on our coaching carousel, one of our favorites, and I think that might lead us to a decision. But Dan Campbell, Detroit Lions, I mean, they have had a really bad season as far as not winning a lot of games. How do you think his seat feels?
So this is ice cold. He's really comfortable. They are the best 2-win team I've ever seen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we said last year Pittsburgh was the worst undefeated team that we've ever seen. You know, the Cardinals were the worst 7-0 team we had ever saw. It's weird, but I agree with you. The Lions are the best 2-win team I think I've ever. I'd be legitimately scared to face them on any day.
Yeah, they're a tough physical team. They play extremely hard. And the thing with the Lions is they've had a lot of injuries and a lot of volatility and stuff. Like they're a 2-win team that has no talent, right? This was a total rebuild. And on top of having no talent, they've had all kind of injuries. TJ Hawkinson, their best player, has been out for like the last few games. He's going to miss the rest of the year. Jared Goff has missed a bunch of games. Their starting quarterback, right? They've had all kinds of injuries and issues that they've had to come through on top of not being very talented at all. But they fought hard, right? They've been in a lot of close games. They could have actually probably had 4 or 5 wins if a few things break the other way. And I think the thing with what Dan Campbell has done is he's kind of given some energy into that locker room and that culture in Detroit. Because I think one thing Detroit was missing for a while, even when they had Matt Stafford, was there was nothing really. There was no pop. There was no zest or whatever. There was no reason to get behind Detroit or to go to Detroit if you're a free agent or to follow Detroit. There was just nothing to it. You either were going to Calvin Johnson, when he was there, was probably the only reason people ever watched Detroit games. Dan Campbell's made them interesting. And I think we don't need to undersell that, because if there's one thing you want to be in the NFL, even if you're not going to be very good, is you want to be interesting.
Yeah.
And Dan Campbell's made them interesting. And I think they're going to get better. It's going to be a long slog. I think they're going to be terrible next year too, in terms of wins and losses, because they're probably going to get a young quarterback. But I think it's just going to be a slow growing process here. I think they're a good start there in Detroit. I think it's going to be a long build. But I wouldn't be surprised if, say, 2-3 years, Rodgers is done in Green Bay kind of thing, if Detroit takes over that division.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dan Campbell he's said all the right things. He's done all the right things. His team has performed to the best of their ability. I don't think they have much of a team. But I don't think that as ownership of the Detroit Lions, you can think anything but good things of what Dan Campbell has done with the season he's been given. Your starting quarterback is taken away from you. You're giving someone else's scraps that they obviously didn't want. A lot of injuries, a lot of stuff going on. But I think he's done the best with what he has. And I like what he says, like when they say, hey, Jared Goff, quarterback next year. He goes, I have no problem with Jared Goff. I'm completely open to it. I think he says all the right stuff. Whether he likes Goff or not, that's a different story. But he's doing what he needs to do to your 2-win team. So
he's authentic. He's 100% authentic. And I think players, owners, other coaches appreciate the heck out of that.
Yeah, I think he's one of the coaches that in the NFL, all of the other coaches probably respect him the most of being a 2-win team. Like he probably has so much respect from other coaches where like Hugh Jackson, a guy who went like 0-16 two seasons in a row, he's an absolute joke. So I like Dan Campbell. I like what he's doing with the Detroit Lions. They're a fun story.